From KVUE News in Austin, you're watching Texas This Week with Ashley Goodo.
Good Sunday morning. From expelling a member to key deadlines, it's been a busy week in the Texas House of Representatives. Scott Braddock from the Quorum Report joins us to recap the big moments. But first, let's talk about some of the other big political stories in the 3 things you need to know in Texas politics. Thursday marked the end of Title 42, the policy that allowed the U.S. to turn away migrants at the U.S.-Mexico border because of the COVID-19 pandemic. It had been in place for 3 years. Federal and state lawmakers braced for a surge of migrants to try to enter the country. Large groups of migrants rushed to the border trying to beat the clock. On Monday, Governor Greg Abbott deployed hundreds of Texas National Guard soldiers as part of the newly formed Texas Tactical Border Force.
The Texas National Guard is loading Black Hawk helicopters and C-130s, deploying specially trained National Guard members for the Texas Tactical Border Force. They will be deployed to hot spots along the border to intercept, to repel, and to turn back migrants who are trying to enter Texas illegally.
Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick and Speaker of the Texas House Dade Phelan don't seem to be any closer to reaching an agreement on how to give Texans property tax relief. Patrick wants to increase the homestead exemption. Phelan wants to cut the appraisal cap on all property. This week, Phelan released an ad featuring interviews and comments by Dan Patrick calling for caps, writing, quote, "It's time for Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick to agree with Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick." Last month, Patrick acknowledged he once advocated for caps, but says he has since realized that won't give homeowners lasting relief. And he was quick to take to Twitter to criticize Phelan and push his plan. For the 3rd time this session, the Texas House of Representatives took up Senate Bill 14 to ban gender-affirming care, including puberty blockers and hormones for minors. Democrats twice delayed debate on the bill with points of order. On Friday, they again raised points of order, but were not successful. After hours of debate on the bill and amendments, the legislation passed. The House will take another vote on the bill Monday before sending it back to the Senate for approval of the amendments that were added. If that happens, the bill will head to the governor. It was a big week in the Texas House of Representatives with several key deadlines. And for the first time since 1927, the members voted to expel a representative. Scott Braddock, editor of Harvey Cronberg's The Quorum Report, joined me to recap this week in the House. You know, it has been a week in the Texas House of Representatives. Yeah. Give us one word to describe it.
Well, I don't know if I can give you one word, but when the week started, this beard was jet black.
It's been
long.
Okay.
Let's put it that way. A ton is going on. Conflict would be the word, I think.
Good word, because the Texas House of Representatives had some very critical deadlines this week. Let's talk about those deadlines. What was happening this week?
The deadlines in the Texas House of Representatives were put in decades ago to try to create transparency. What used to happen in the legislative process was on the very last day or the very last couple of days, a whole lot of bills would pass at once and no one really knew what was happening. We still get a version of that, but now that there are these deadlines that come a couple of weeks from the actual official end of session, it allows for there to be more transparency. You can see in real time which bills are passing and which bills are dying. And so earlier this week on Monday, you had sort of the unofficial deadline for House committees to report House bills to the full floor for consideration. And then on Thursday night, you had what's called second reading deadline. That means that the full House has to give something initial approval if it's a House bill so that it can continue through the process. Those bills aren't necessarily going to be law, but if they had not cleared that hurdle on Thursday night at midnight, then they would definitely be dead. Although we do say, there's always nuance to this, Ashley, we do say that nothing's really dead till sine die, because there is an amendment process and certain pieces of legislation can be tacked on to other pieces of legislation as amendments. And so you got to watch all that real closely as well.
Yeah. Let's talk about that first deadline that you mentioned, the deadline for committees to vote bills out of committee. In sort of a surprise move, the House Select Committee on Community Safety voted out a bill that would raise the age to purchase semi-automatic weapons from 18 to 21. This bill had been left in committee, left pending in committee since last month. Tell us about this and the surprise move to get this out of committee.
Phony, straight up political theater. That bill had no chance of becoming law in Texas. We should say that for the audience right up front. And I do think that it's a little unfair, and actually quite unfair, to the Uvalde families who have been absolutely jerked around in this process from day one. You know that when they came to testify from Uvalde, a lot of those families drove overnight to be here in Austin to testify. And I guess it's about a 2.5, 3 hour drive, something like that, from Uvalde to get to Austin. Some of those people showed up at 8 a.m. and had to wait at the Capitol for 13 hours to tell their stories to lawmakers. To their credit, they didn't leave. And then a couple of weeks later, they were led to believe that maybe that bill was going to be voted out of committee, and it still wasn't voted out. And then it was finally voted out of that committee, at a time when it really had no chance to clear those deadlines we talked about before. The chairman of the committee that voted it out didn't move the paperwork along to the calendars committee in time for them to consider it for a calendar to be realistically considered. And so I do think that the Uvalde families have rightly been focused on the chairman, Ryan Guillen, who's a Republican from South Texas. Their anger has been directed at him, and he was the one who was slow on that. It's interesting that these things don't happen mechanically, Ashley. It's not as if the committee votes and then immediately the calendars committee has it and immediately it then goes to the floor. A person has to actually take the paperwork over to the other office and make it happen. In this case, that deadline was missed.
All right, we're going to talk about the deadline that hit Thursday at midnight, the last day for the House to take those first votes on House bills. A lot of bills met their demise that night.
They did, and it's sort of a tradition in the Texas House. You have this giant calendar. It's the agenda for the House. It's set by that calendars committee that you mentioned before. And I think there were nearly 300 bills that were set for consideration on Thursday. I've got a friend who's an old school lobbyist who's retired now, who said that he always called the Wednesday calendar, the day before the big deadline, he always called that the cruel joke calendar, because if a bill got on that, it was really probably not going to become Texas law. You do know that on the day before, about half of the agenda was not even addressed, and it got moved into that Thursday calendar. So the idea that any of these things would become Texas law if they were below maybe the 6th or 7th page on the agenda probably were not going to happen. You did see Democrats trying to slow down the process in the House by talking at length about certain bills. It's something that they always do if they see something on the agenda that they don't like. And one of the things on the agenda that they were very much against was another bill targeting the transgender community, and that bill did not pass.
Yeah. The other big story, though, coming out of the House of Representatives this week was the expulsion of Brian Slayton. Talk to us about that.
You know, Representative Slayton had been a conservative firebrand in the House, somebody who had made a lot of enemies even within the Republican Party. He's one of those Republicans who argues often that the leadership is not conservative enough. And so when he was accused here, he really didn't have any friends in the House, not very many. And it's my understanding that it was some very conservative Republicans who were the ones to basically report him and his activity. He was accused, and apparently, according to the committee, the General Investigating Committee of the House that looked into this, which, by the way, is not a court process, it's a legislative proceeding. This is the House policing itself. Those legislators on the General Investigating Committee heard from some of the folks who had been said to be some of Brian Slayton's most ardent allies, who said that he had done this, that he had provided alcohol to and had had sex with a 19-year-old intern in his office. And the House took what's almost unprecedented, in modern times anyway. The last time this happened was in 1927. They took almost unprecedented action, which, as you mentioned, was expelling him from the body. I was there on the floor. It was kind of surreal to watch, and you've seen it, Ashley, because you've covered the House a lot. In the past, that big vote board where all the names of the legislators are up there, so you can see in real time when they're voting on bills, are they voting yes or no? His name was on that board, but after he was expelled, they put up ladders in the chamber, and staffers climbed up the ladders and removed his name from the board. And the sergeant at arms who polices the chamber, the sergeant was told that he is not allowed to even walk onto the House floor anymore. A pretty dramatic moment in the House.
Yeah. Scott, tell us what you'll be looking for in these final days of the session.
Well, I think we got about 15 days left, something like that. People can check out the second-by-second countdown at quorumreport.com. We'll be covering it all, of course, on the Texas Take podcast. There's my shameless plug, Ashley, as we go forward. We need to see what's going to happen on property taxes. That's something that the Speaker of the House and the Lieutenant Governor still seem to be miles apart on the details of how to deliver on that for folks. And also the question of whether the governor ends up calling a special session on the issue of, quote, school choice, school vouchers. Twice now, the Texas House has taken pretty decisive votes, just smacking that down, but the governor's not giving up. So there's a lot to cover in these last final days.
Now it is time for my bill of the week, and I am elated to tell you that a bill Texans have been advocating for since 2021 is headed to Governor Greg Abbott's desk. This week, the Senate gave its approval to House Bill 567, the Crown Act, by North Texas Democrat State Representative Retta Bowers. The bill bans discrimination based on hair texture or styles associated with race. It stands for creating a respectful and open world for natural hair. I have stood in this very spot for more than 2 years now explaining why legislation like this is so important to Black Texans. So I won't keep you long this morning. I just want to say thank you to our state lawmakers for listening to your constituents and realizing all Texans should feel welcome to show up as their authentic selves from our feet to our crowns. That's Texas This Week.